Sometimes, the people who claim to love you the most are the ones planning your destruction. I whispered to myself, staring at the changed locks on my own front door. The winter wind bit at my face as I stood there, briefcase still in hand, realizing that my own parents had just declared war. But let me start from the beginning. 3 weeks ago, I signed my divorce papers and thought that would be the most challenging thing I'd face this year. I was wrong. My name is Charlotte, and this is the story of how my family tried to steal my house, and how I fought back. It started with an unexpected phone call on a seemingly ordinary Tuesday morning. I was enjoying my coffee break at the small cafe across from my office building when my phone buzzed. My mother's name, Jennifer, flashed on the screen, and I nearly choked on my latte. We hadn't spoken in months, which wasn't unusual. Growing up as the second daughter, I had always lived in my sister Natalie's shadow. "Charlotte, dear." Her voice came through unnaturally gentle. The kind of gentle that always preceded something unpleasant in our family. "Mom." I stirred my coffee nervously, watching the cream create spiral patterns. "This is unexpected. I just wanted to check how you're doing after everything." The pause was deliberate, a reminder of what she considered my failure. Must have been difficult. I sighed, feeling the familiar ache in my chest. Only 3 weeks had passed since I'd finalized my divorce from Peter after finding him with his assistant. The memory still stung, but at least I'd gotten the house and the settlement. The house that would soon become the centerpiece of a family drama I never saw coming. "Listen, sweetheart," Mom interrupted before I could respond. "Your father and I miss you terribly. Why don't you come over for dinner this Saturday? It's been too long since we've had a family meal." The invitation caught me off guard. In the 12 years since I'd moved out, my parents had invited me over exactly 3 times, all of them when Natalie was being celebrated for something. They had never shown interest in my life unless it was to compare it unfavorably to my sister's. I hesitated, my instincts screaming at me to decline. But maybe this was different. Maybe they really did want to reconnect now that I was alone again. "Sure, Mom. I'd like that." As I hung up, I sat there puzzling over the call. My parents had never been the warm, inviting type. Growing up, Natalie had always been the golden child, the one with straight A's, the one who married right after college, the one who gave them grandchildren. I was just Charlotte, the afterthought. The memory of my 16th birthday suddenly flooded back. While Natalie had gotten a brand new car for her sweet 16, complete with a red bow and a party for 50 people, my birthday had been marked with a quiet dinner and a gift card to a bookstore. "You're more of an intellectual type," Mom had said, as if that explained everything. What she really meant was that I wasn't worth the expense. Saturday arrived too quickly. I pulled into my parents' driveway, noting that their modest ranch-style home seemed to have aged considerably since my last visit. The paint was peeling, and the gutters sagged noticeably. Dad opened the door before I could knock. "Charlotte, come in," he said with unusual enthusiasm, pulling me into an awkward hug. The scent of his aftershave, the same brand he'd worn my entire life, brought back a flood of memories, not all of them pleasant. Mom appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "You're right on time. Dinner's almost ready." She'd prepared all my childhood favorites, I noticed: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green bean casserole. The good china was set out, the kind usually reserved for Thanksgiving and Christmas. Something was definitely up. As we ate, they bombarded me with questions. "So, how's work going?" Dad asked, cutting into his chicken with precise movements. "Fine," I said, watching him carefully. "I'm up for a promotion next month." "That's nice," Mom said, in the same tone she'd used when I told her I was getting divorced. "And what do you do in your free time now? Any new hobbies?" I shrugged, pushing a potato around my plate. "Not really. Just been focused on getting through each day." The divorce took a lot out of me. I watched their faces carefully, noting the quick glance they exchanged. "Of course, dear," Mom said, patting my hand sympathetically. "But you're young. You'll bounce back." Another glance between them. "Speaking of bouncing back, how are you managing in that big house all by yourself?" There it was. The real reason for the dinner invitation. I'm managing fine, I said flatly. I'm planning to renovate next year, once I've saved up a bit. Mom's eyes lit up. Renovation? How timely. Dad cleared his throat. You see, Charlotte, your mother and I have been thinking about doing some renovations ourselves. The plumbing needs updating, and the electrical wiring isn't up to code anymore. I set down my fork, my appetite suddenly gone. I knew where this was heading, but I couldn't quite believe it. That's good, I said cautiously. This house could use some work. The thing is, Mom continued, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand, we need somewhere to stay during the renovation. It could take several months. Natalie's place is already crowded with the kids, Dad added quickly. And renting would be such a waste of money. The silence that followed was heavy with expectation. I could feel their eyes on me, waiting for me to offer what they'd clearly planned to ask for all along. Part of me wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it all, how they'd orchestrated this entire evening, down to my favorite childhood meal, just to manipulate me into taking them in. We were hoping, Mom said finally, her voice honey-sweet, that you might let us stay at your house. It's so big, and you have all that space just for yourself. I wanted to say no immediately. The thought of my parents invading my personal space made my skin crawl. We'd never gotten along well, and after years of feeling second best to Natalie, I'd come to value my independence fiercely. But looking at their expectant faces, I hesitated. Maybe this could be a chance to finally build a better relationship with them. Maybe they really did want to reconnect. And my house was spacious, a 4-bedroom colonial with plenty of room. I guess that would be okay, I heard myself say, even as every instinct screamed at me to reconsider. When would you need to move in? Next week, Mom suggested eagerly. The contractors are starting on Monday. We'd be so grateful, Charlotte, Dad said, his relief palpable. This would help us tremendously. Against my better judgment, I nodded. All right. You can stay with me until your renovation is complete. The joy and relief on their faces seemed genuine, making me wonder if I'd misjudged their intentions. Maybe they really did want to reconnect, and this living arrangement would give us that opportunity. Little did I know that this decision would lead me to that cold January evening, standing locked out of my own home, listening to my mother's voice through the door saying those words that would change everything. Charlotte, dear, you really don't need all this space. And your sister's family is struggling. But that moment was still weeks away. For now, I was just a daughter trying to help her parents, ignoring the warning bells ringing in the back of my mind. Sometimes the hardest lessons are the ones we have to learn twice. Trust, once broken, should never be given again so easily. 1 week later, my parents arrived at my doorstep with several suitcases. Dad carried a box of personal items while Mom clutched a bag full of her favorite kitchenware. Welcome, I said, holding the door open. I prepared the guest room upstairs for you both. This is so kind of you, Charlotte, Mom said, kissing my cheek as she passed. We promise not to be a bother. The way she immediately headed for the kitchen, rather than the guest room, should have been my first warning sign. As I helped them settle in, I tried to ignore the nagging feeling in my gut that I might regret this decision. But I pushed those thoughts aside. How bad could it be? It was only temporary, after all. The first few days were deceptively smooth. I left for work each morning around 8:30 and didn't return until after 7 o'clock, which limited our interaction to evenings and weekends. To my amazement, Mom had dinner waiting for me when I got home, something I hadn't experienced since childhood. How was work today? She'd ask as I hung up my coat and kicked off my heels. Busy but productive, I'd reply, sinking into a chair at the kitchen table. Dad would usually be in the living room watching the news, offering a casual wave as I passed by. On weekends, they'd leave early to check on the renovation progress at their house, giving me space to breathe and maintain some semblance of my normal routine. The contractor says they've started on the bathroom, Dad reported one Sunday evening when they returned. Found some water damage that needs addressing. Sounds like it's going to take longer than expected, I commented, trying to keep the concern out of my voice. Mom nodded sympathetically. These things always do. But we're so grateful to have somewhere comfortable to stay. I smiled tightly. Happy to help. But the peaceful coexistence didn't last long. The first sign of trouble came on a Saturday morning when I turned on some classical music while cleaning the kitchen. Mom appeared in the doorway, her face pinched with disapproval. "Charlotte, would you mind turning that down? Or better yet, off. I've got a terrible migraine starting." "Oh, sure," I said, reaching for the speaker. "I just always clean to music." "Well, when you live alone, you can do whatever you want," she replied, her tone sharp. "But when you have guests, you need to be considerate." I bit my tongue to keep from pointing out that they weren't exactly guests. They had asked to stay in my home, and I had graciously accommodated them. Instead, I finished cleaning in silence, the only sound the occasional passive-aggressive sigh from my mother. The next issue arose when my friend Jennifer stopped by on a Tuesday evening with takeout and a bottle of wine. "This is so nice," I said as we settled on the couch with our food. "I've been needing a girls' night." We were halfway through our second glass of wine when Dad cleared his throat from the hallway. "Charlotte, it's nearly 10 o'clock, he said pointedly. "Your mother and I are trying to relax before bed." Jennifer looked at me with raised eyebrows. I gave her an apologetic smile. "Sorry, Dad. We'll keep it down." After Jennifer left, Mom approached me in the kitchen. "Honey, we're not trying to be difficult, but having visitors after 7 o'clock in the evening is disruptive. We're old, and we need our quiet time." "I understand," I said, though I didn't. "I'll tell my friends not to come over for a while." The restrictions continued to pile up. They complained about the groceries I bought. Why waste money on organic? The hardness of their mattress, we're both having back pain, and even how I loaded the dishwasher, that's not how you arrange the plates. Each day, I felt more like a stranger in my own home. I wanted to scream that they could find somewhere else to live if my house wasn't up to their standards, but I kept quiet. This arrangement was temporary. I just needed to endure it a little longer. Then one afternoon, I came home to find 2 children racing through my living room. "Aunt Charlotte," my 6-year-old niece Sophia shouted when she saw me. Her 4-year-old brother Lucas continued to run circles around my coffee table. I looked around in confusion. "Where's your mom?" "In the kitchen with Grandma," Sophia replied before dashing off again. I found Natalie and my mother chatting over coffee, completely unbothered by the chaos echoing from the other room. "Hey, sis," Natalie said casually. "Hope you don't mind us dropping by." "Of course not," I lied. "I just wasn't expecting company." Mom waved her hand dismissively. "I told Natalie you wouldn't mind. Your house has so much space for the kids to play, unlike that cramped apartment they're in." What started as a one-time visit quickly became routine. Soon, my parents were picking up Sophia and Lucas from school and bringing them to my house until Natalie could collect them after work, often as late as 8 or 9 at night. I'd arrive home exhausted, craving peace and quiet, only to find my living room transformed into a playground. Toys scattered everywhere, sticky fingerprints on my furniture, and my parents making no effort to control their grandchildren's behavior. "They're just being kids," Mom would say when I suggested they might tone it down. "Children need to express themselves." Weekends became even worse. Natalie, her husband Michael, and the kids would spend entire days at my house. The adults would chat while the children ran wild, and I'd retreat to my bedroom, feeling like an unwelcome intruder in my own home. One evening, after Natalie had finally taken her children home, I approached my parents in the living room. "I know you enjoy seeing the kids," I began carefully, "but I need some downtime after work. Maybe they could visit less often." Dad looked up from his newspaper with a frown. "They're family, Charlotte. Family should always be welcome." "I'm not saying they aren't welcome," I clarified. "I'm just asking for some boundaries." Mom exchanged a look with Dad. "We'll see what we can do." But nothing changed. If anything, the visits increased, and I found myself dreading the drive home each day. I consoled myself with the thought that my parents' renovation would eventually be completed, and life would return to normal. Then came the Saturday that changed everything. Mom announced she was hosting a family dinner at my house. Natalie, Michael, and the kids arrived at 5 o'clock, and we all gathered around my dining table. Throughout the meal, I noticed my parents and Natalie exchanging meaningful glances. The atmosphere felt charged, like they were all in on some secret I wasn't privy to. As we finished dessert, Dad cleared his throat. "Charlotte, we need to have a serious conversation with you." "It's about Natalie and her family," Mom began. "They're facing some financial difficulties right now. The rent on their apartment keeps increasing. It's becoming unsustainable for them." I could see where this was heading, but I desperately hoped I was wrong. "We were thinking," Mom said, reaching across to pat my hand, "that since you have all this space, maybe Natalie and her family could move in temporarily. Just until they get back on their feet." My mouth fell open as I stared at my parents and sister. I looked at Natalie, who was giving me what I assumed was supposed to be a helpless, pleading look, the same look she'd used our entire childhood to get her way. "No," I said flatly. "Absolutely not." The table fell silent. For pairs of eyes stared at me in disbelief, as if my refusal was completely unexpected. Natalie was the first to break the silence. "What do you mean, no?" Her voice rose sharply. "You live here all alone, Charlotte. This house is way too big for just one person." "It's my house," I replied, feeling my temper rising. "I get to decide who lives in it." "But we're family," Mom said, her eyes wide with shock. "We support each other." "I have supported you," I countered. "I've let you and Dad stay here rent-free for weeks. I've allowed my house to become a daycare center for Sophia and Lucas. I've put up with having my life completely disrupted." Mom's hand flew to her chest, her face contorting into an expression of wounded dignity. "I never thought my own daughter would throw our living situation in our faces like this." "That's not what I'm doing," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm simply establishing a boundary." "Boundaries?" Natalie scoffed. "That's just selfish talk. You have all this space, and you're living here alone while we're crammed into a 2-bedroom apartment with 2 growing kids. Then maybe you should have thought about that before having children you can't afford," I snapped. Natalie gasped. "How dare you? Not everyone can be a childless divorcee with a big empty house. I earned this house," I said through gritted teeth. "I worked hard, I made smart choices, and most importantly, it's mine. Mine to decide who lives in it." "So that's it?" Dad asked. "You won't help your own sister in her time of need?" I looked at each of their faces, the disappointment, the judgment, the entitlement. For years, I'd been trying to earn their approval, to be seen as valuable as Natalie. But now I realized I didn't need their approval. I needed my peace of mind. "That's it," I confirmed. "Natalie and her family are not moving in. This discussion is over." I stood up and walked to my bedroom, closing the door firmly behind me. I could hear the muffled sounds of their continued conversation, no doubt dissecting my selfishness and cruelty. I didn't care. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I'd stood up for myself. It had been a particularly exhausting day at work. 3 back-to-back meetings had left me drained, and all I wanted was to soak in a hot bath and forget about my family drama for a few hours. As I pulled into my driveway around 7:30 p.m., I noticed extra cars parked outside, Natalie's minivan and an unfamiliar sedan. My stomach knotted at the thought of another ambush family gathering. I inserted my key into the front door lock, but it wouldn't turn. Thinking I'd mixed up my keys, I tried again. Nothing. A third attempt confirmed my growing suspicion: the locks had been changed. Through the side window, I saw movement. Mom's face appeared, peering out through the curtains. The porch light clicked on, and she opened the door just enough for the security chain to pull taut. "Yes," she said, as if I were a stranger. "Mom, what's going on?" "My key doesn't work." My voice sounded calmer than I felt, even as rage began to build in my chest. "Oh, that," she said casually, as if we were discussing the weather. "We had the locks changed today. For security purposes, you understand." I stood there, briefcase still in hand, as the full reality of their betrayal crashed over me. Through the gap in the door, I could see Natalie sitting on my couch, calmly sipping tea from my favorite mug. Her children were already running around my living room, their shoes leaving marks on my carpet. They had clearly been planning this for hours, if not days. "Let me in right now," I demanded. This is illegal. Dad appeared behind Mom, his face set in that familiar stern expression he'd used throughout my childhood when delivering unwelcome news. We've been thinking, Charlotte. You really don't need all this space, and Natalie's family is struggling. It makes more sense for them to live here. Are you insane? The words came out in a whisper that gradually rose to a shout. You can't just take over my house. We're not taking it over, Mom corrected, her voice dripping with condescension. We're just making better use of the space. Natalie has 2 growing children, and their apartment is much too small. You're single now, you don't need 4 bedrooms. This is illegal, I repeated, pulling out my phone. I'm calling the police. Mom smiled that patronizing smile I'd grown to hate. You wouldn't call the police on your own parents. On your sister and her innocent children. What would people think? Behind them, I heard Natalie's voice, see? This is exactly why we had to do it this way. She's always been selfish. She'd never understand the concept of family helping family. Through the gap, I watched as she casually arranged her children's toys on my coffee table, as if she already owned the place. Lucas was jumping on my couch, the new one I'd bought after the divorce, while Sophia was emptying her backpack of school supplies onto my dining room table. You have 30 seconds to open this door, I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. Or I'm calling the police. Now, Charlotte, Dad began, using that lecturing tone that had always made me feel small. You're being hysterical. This is a family matter. You have plenty of money, you can find somewhere else to live. Think of your sister's children. The children need stability, Mom added, as if that justified everything. Your sister's been through so much, and here you are, living alone in this big house. It's selfish, really. I could see boxes stacked in my living room, they'd already started moving Natalie's things in. How long had they been planning this? How many times had they sat in my house, eating my food, accepting my hospitality, all while plotting to steal my home? I'll be spending the night at a hotel, I said, my voice eerily calm despite the rage boiling inside me. We can discuss this tomorrow when I've had time to think. Relief flooded my mother's face. That's a very mature decision, Charlotte. I knew you'd come around. They thought they'd won. They thought I was giving up. They couldn't have been more wrong. From my car, I called James, the lawyer who had handled my divorce. His voicemail picked up, and I left an urgent message explaining the situation. While waiting for his call back, I paced my hotel room, alternating between disbelief and fury. How dare they? The house I'd fought for in my divorce, the home I'd been paying the mortgage on for years, they thought they could just take it? Because Natalie needed it more? Because she had children? Because I was just single? Through the window, I watched as more cars arrived at my house, Michael's SUV and what looked like a moving van. They were actually moving in, right now, as if their hostile takeover was a done deal. As if I would just accept it and walk away. My phone rang just as I was considering calling the police directly. Charlotte, it's James. I got your message. Are you okay? Not really, I admitted, my voice shaking. My parents have illegally taken over my house. They changed the locks while I was at work and won't let me in. They're moving my sister and her family in as we speak. That's absolutely illegal, James confirmed, his voice hard. They have no right to do that, regardless of how long they've been staying with you. You're well within your rights to call the police. That's what I thought. But part of me worried I was overreacting. You're not, he assured me. This is criminal trespass and possibly burglary, depending on your state laws. Call the police, file a report, and if you need me to represent you legally afterward, I'm here. I thanked him and ended the call, feeling a strange mix of determination and sadness. I never imagined I'd have to involve law enforcement in a dispute with my own family, but they had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Looking at the clock, I saw it was 9 p.m. Through the hotel window, I could still see lights on in my house, where my family was probably congratulating themselves on their clever plan. Perfect timing for a wake-up call. At the police station, the night shift officer looked up as I approached the front desk. I need to report an illegal seizure of property, I said. My parents have changed the locks to my house and are refusing to let me in. The officer nodded and gestured for me to sit. I pulled out my driver's license and opened my phone to access the digital copies of my deed and mortgage documents. As I explained the whole situation, I could see the disbelief on his face turn to concern. "Let me get this straight," he said. "Your parents were staying with you temporarily, and while you were at work, they changed the locks and are now moving your sister's family in? Without your permission?" "Yes," I confirmed. "And they refused to let me enter my own house." He shook his head. "We'll need to send officers out there immediately. This is a clear case of illegal eviction and criminal trespass." Around midnight, the hotel phone rang. "Ms. Anderson? This is Officer Reynolds from the police department. I'm calling about your house situation." I sat up immediately. "Yes, what happened?" "We were forced to detain your parents, ma'am. They resisted our officers and used insulting language when we explained they were illegally occupying your property. They're currently at the police station." My stomach dropped. Despite everything, they were still my parents. "They're in jail?" "In holding cells, yes." "When would you be able to come to the station?" I glanced at the clock. "I can come in the morning, first thing." After hanging up, my cell phone immediately began ringing, my parents and sister calling repeatedly. I didn't answer any of the calls and simply turned off my phone. I needed space to think clearly without their manipulation. Through the hotel window, I could see the police cars still parked outside my house, their lights casting red and blue shadows across the neighborhood. What were the neighbors thinking? What stories would circulate tomorrow? But then I realized I didn't care. Let them talk. Let them know exactly what my family had tried to do. For too long, I'd been the accommodating one, the one who gave in to keep the peace. The one who accepted being second best, who tried to earn love that should have been freely given. But not anymore. Tonight, that pattern would end, once and for all. 6 months have passed since that winter night, and my life has transformed in ways I never imagined. The morning after the police intervention, my parents' facade of righteous indignation finally crumbled. The reality of spending a night in jail cells had shattered their illusion of superiority. "I'll withdraw my statement on one condition," I told the officer, looking directly at my parents' disheveled figures. "They leave my house today. All of them." They agreed immediately, their previous defiance replaced by desperate compliance. But it wasn't over yet. As they packed their belongings, I discovered more evidence of their betrayal, documents showing they'd forged my signature on renovation contracts, bank statements revealing they'd attempted to access my accounts, and emails detailing their lengthy plot to take over my home. "You never had any renovation plans for your house, did you?" I confronted them. The silence was answer enough. Natalie's financial situation turned out to be far worse than they'd admitted. Her husband Michael's failed investments hadn't just eaten their savings, they'd accumulated over $3 million in debt. They'd seen my house as their escape route, a free solution to their problems. The aftermath was swift and absolute. The local newspaper caught wind of the story. Apparently, the neighbors had been more observant than I realized. Local parents arrested after attempting to steal daughter's house made headlines in our community. Their carefully maintained image of the perfect family shattered overnight. Dad lost his position on the town council. Mom's bridge club, where she'd reigned as president for 15 years, quietly asked her to step down. But the real blow came when their own house, which they'd neglected for years while plotting to take mine, was declared structurally unsound. The repairs they postponed would now cost them nearly all their retirement savings. Natalie's life imploded spectacularly. Her attempts to spin the story as a misunderstanding backfired when her emails to Mom and Dad became public record during the legal proceedings. Her carefully crafted social media image of the perfect mother and daughter crumbled as screenshots of her messages circulated. "Charlotte doesn't deserve that house anyway. She's just a childless divorcee. We're a real family." The bank foreclosed on her apartment. Michael, faced with mounting debt and public shame, finally admitted to embezzling from his company. He took a plea deal, leaving Natalie to face their creditors alone. Her perfectly planned life, built on others' generosity and manipulation, collapsed like a house of cards. Last week, I received a thick envelope from James. Inside were restraining orders against my entire family, a necessary precaution after their desperate attempts to explain and make things right. Their version of making things right had included more attempts at manipulation, guilt-tripping, and even a bizarre scheme to have their pastor mediate the situation. But I'm not the same person they tried to manipulate. The experience changed me, awakened something stronger inside me. I had my locks changed again, not just the ones they'd tampered with, but every lock in the house. I installed a state-of-the-art security system, complete with cameras. This is my fortress now, and I defend it fiercely. The house feels different these days, lighter, somehow. I've redecorated every room, erasing the traces of their presence. The kitchen where Mom tried to establish her domain is now a sleek, modern space where I cook elaborate meals for friends who actually respect boundaries. The room that would have been Natalie's is my home gym, a place where I build my strength in more ways than one. My career has soared since I stopped trying to shrink myself to manage their expectations. The promotion I mentioned during that fateful dinner? I got it, along with a substantial raise. Turns out that when you're not constantly managing family drama, you have a lot more energy for professional growth. The neighbors who witnessed everything have become unexpected allies. Mrs. Peterson from next door brings me coffee every Sunday morning. We always knew something was off with them, she told me. The way they talked about you when you weren't around, we're just glad you finally saw it too. Yesterday, I received a letter from Natalie, forwarded through James. She wrote about forgiveness, family obligations, the children missing their aunt. The old me might have wavered, might have felt guilty. The new me sent it straight through the shredder. Some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt. I've learned that family isn't about blood, it's about respect, boundaries, and mutual support. The friends who stood by me through this, who offered couches and shoulders to cry on, who celebrated my victory, they're my real family now. Sometimes, late at night, I sit in my garden with a glass of wine and marvel at how peaceful life can be when you're not carrying the weight of toxic relationships. The roses I planted after everything, red ones, bold and unapologetic, are blooming beautifully. Like me, they're thriving in new soil, growing stronger every day. I am not just surviving, I am flourishing. The house is mine, truly mine, and so is my life. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't in winning the battle, it's in finally being strong enough to fight it in the first place.